So I want to preach on the subject, don't miss your God moments. Don't miss your God moments. In our lives, we will have God moments. And the thing about God moments is that it doesn't happen every single day, but when it does happen, you know it's God. And that experience ends up being a marker from which the rest of your life changes. And the person that I want to use in this particular subject is Moses. So everyone here who is familiar with their Bibles is familiar with Moses. Moses, the Hebrew boy who was born into a life of luxury after he had been rescued by Pharaoh's daughter when his mother decided to send him down the Nile River to avoid being killed by the Pharaoh at the time. Moses grew up in the lap of luxury. Even though the Egyptians knew that he was a Hebrew person, he still had favor. He was on the highest of the highest in Egyptian society. What is so interesting about Moses is that though he was in the highest of the highest, he still had his heart angled towards his fellow countrymen. And he knew innately that he was placed in that position by God to liberate the Israelites from their bondage in Egypt. Everything was going very well for Moses until one day he decided to bring to pass the liberation of the Israelites too soon. He ended up killing an Egyptian who was abusing an Israelite. And it didn't go so well. The Israelites turned against him, and the people of Egypt wanted to kill him. Have you ever tried to do something that you knew God was calling you to do and was telling you to do, but you ended up doing it prematurely? You ended up not waiting for the right time, and you ended up doing something that could have been done better if you had just waited. This was the same situation with Moses. He was trying to liberate the Israelites too soon, and it ended up causing more damage to his own life than he could ever think of. He didn't achieve any of his goals. In fact, the worst case scenario happened. Not only was Egypt trying to kill him, but the people that he wanted to liberate did not want any of his help or his assistance. They wanted nothing to do with him. They rejected Moses. In our own life, we try to make things come to pass in our own strength and in our own timing. And whenever we try to do that, it ends up not working out in our favor. This is why Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says that God makes everything beautiful in its time. Everything. If we leave our desires, if we leave our dreams in God's hands, and it is in the will of God for those dreams to come to pass, then we must leave it to Him to bring it to pass at the right time. Because if we try to bring it to pass in our own strength and in our own timing, like Moses, it will not work out well for us. In fact, Moses' destiny was delayed by 40 years because he tried to do something too quickly. Can you afford a delay of 40 years in your own life? It could be 40 years, it could be 20 years, it could be 100 years. If you try to do something outside of God's timing, you will end up doing more damage to your own destiny, and you will end up delaying the fruition of your dream. What's so brilliant about Moses is that his life can be categorized into 3 periods of 40. The first 40 years he spent it in Egypt, under the lap of luxury, born under the lucky star, enjoying the best of Egyptian high society. Then came the next period of 40, where he tried to do something outside of God's timing. It ended up failing, and now he went into the backside of the desert, all the way out into Hebron and Arabia. And he ended up doing sheep farming. He was basically herding sheep. And then in the last 40 years of his life, he ended up being the liberator of Israel, fulfilling the destiny that God had on his life. So let's focus on the second period of 40 years. So Moses is here back in the backside of the desert, and he has become content with mediocrity. He has accepted that in this time he will become a sheep farmer. He will just lay low. He will not do anything. He will not try to do anything. The dreams that he had regarding liberating Israel were just dreams. They're just thoughts that would be nice to do, but Moses knew that he had messed up. Moses must have thought, I've messed up. I've completely destroyed the opportunity for me to liberate the Israelites. It's not meant to be. It's not going to happen. So Moses ends up accepting a life of mediocrity based on his own past mistake. Some of you are in that place right now. You've accepted mediocrity because you feel that you have messed up badly. There's no way it can be fixed. There was no way for Moses to go back to Egypt to try and liberate the Israelites. There was no way for Moses to try and do what he knew God was calling him to do. There's no way it's going to happen. He's too far out in the desert. He's messed up all his connections. He can't go back to Egypt because they're going to kill him. He can't go back to the Israelites because they won't trust him and they don't want him to even help them because of his association with the Egyptians. But despite that, God still had a plan for him. Because you see, God indirectly trained Moses during this time of him being in the desert. Moses was herding sheep. Think about it. Moses was herding sheep. He was telling them where to go. He was telling them what to do. And Moses carried on with his normal life. He went, he got married, he even had children, and he dwelt in the land of Midian, living this mediocre life in his own eyes. But God used the position and the area that he was in for his good. Because as Moses was training the sheep, was guarding the sheep and guiding them, God was preparing Moses to do the same for Israel. This is how we know that God works all things together for our good. Moses messed up in Egypt. He tried to do things outside of God's will. And he ended up broken, destroyed, and disheartened. He ran to the land of Midian. He ended up living a mediocre life. But God still used that time in Midian to train him. As God was training Moses to handle sheep, he was training Moses to handle the people of Israel. In your own life, wherever you are, you may feel that you've messed up. You may feel that there's no way that God can use you. But rest assured, God works all things together for our good, even our mistakes. In whatever season you are in right now, even if it seems mediocre, God is using that season to prepare you to come into your destiny. We come to the next period of 40. And the next period of 40 starts in Exodus 3. So let's go to Exodus 3 and read a couple of verses. Exodus 3, starting at verse 1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert, and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am. I'm only going to read those 4 verses because this is what I want to hit home to you. One day, Moses wakes up. And it was just an ordinary day, doing the same thing as he has always done, tending to the flock, taking them to get some water, making sure they're okay, protecting them. It was just a normal, ordinary day. But this was the day that everything changed for Moses. When God comes into your situation, everything has to change. And you know that God has come into your situation when things start changing instantly. There's a quote by Vladimir Lenin that is one of my favorite quotes, and it says that there are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. That's exactly how God operates. Because here Moses spent 40 years in the desert doing the same routine for every day for the last 40 years. And on this particular day, a bush was on fire. Just a bush. Something ordinary, something that was common for that area where he was in, due to the intense heat that would be in the deserts of Arabia. There would be bushes that would be on fire. But what caught Moses' attention was that this particular bush was on fire, but it was not being consumed. In verse 3 it says, Moses said, I will turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. I want to focus on this verse 4, which says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush. This is what I want you to focus on. Listen closely. Moses had the opportunity to ignore his God moment. Moses had the full opportunity to ignore his God moment. Moses could have kept tending to the flock. He could have seen the bush that it's burning and it's not being consumed, and he could have left it. He could have carried on doing what he was doing for the last 40 years of his life. What's changed for Moses was that he turned aside to look. He marveled and he went towards the bush. Now imagine this. What if Moses did not turn to see the bush? What if he was so despondent in his heart that he ended up missing a move of God? In your own life, are you so focused on your mediocre life? Are you still thinking to yourself, it's never gonna happen, I've messed up, it's too late, I am too old, it's never going to happen for me? Are you so focused on that if God himself were to come right next to you, you would ignore him and just focus on how terrible your life has been, and just focus on the mediocrity of your life? Moses had every opportunity to ignore the burning bush. And look at this. Verse 4 says, when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him. It was only when Moses looked at the burning bush that God called to him. God will do miracles in your life. You will see him around you. The question is, do you notice? Do you care enough to notice? Do you care enough to notice that God is right there, ready, willing, and able to help you? Ready, willing, and able to change your life, to change the trajectory of your life, to change your life from being mediocre to being absolutely eventful, full of glory and power for the Lord. We have to ask ourselves this question. In every Christian's life, there's going to be a moment where you have your burning bush moment. God will show up. God will be right there. And you yourself will know that it is God. Will you turn aside to look at your burning bush? When you turn aside to look at your burning bush, the Lord sees it and He calls out to you. He will call out your name as He did to Moses. And at that moment, you need to recognize that your life will never be the same again. When you commune with God, when you have a God encounter like this, you are never the same again. So don't be distracted. Don't let your head be down all the time. The next 40 years of Moses' life ends up being the most eventful out of the last 80 years. It's never too late for God to come into your life and to change things. It is never too late for God to come down, to change your life, to change your heart, to open the right doors for you. It is never too late with God. So don't be distracted. Don't let your head be down. Keep your eyes on Jesus. And when your burning bush moment comes, turn aside, look and recognize that it is a burning bush moment in your life. And that is where you need to say, when God calls your name, here am I. Moses' life was never the same again from this moment. From this moment, he goes into Egypt and he sees the mighty power of God. Through the plagues, through the Red Sea parting, through God ensuring that the nation of Israel is protected, he sees an incredible move of God, and Moses ends up accomplishing his destiny to lead the Israelites out of Egypt. You yourself will have your own burning bush moment. When God calls out to you, don't delay. Recognize that now is the time for you to stand up for God and to achieve the destiny that He has for your life. If God is in the plan, it will never fail. Yes, Moses had many challenges from this point onwards, but God was with him every step of the way. God strengthened him. God gave him power. God gave him authority, wisdom, guidance. God was there every step of the way when Moses embarked on these last 40 years of his life. Likewise for you, when you have your burning bush moment, rest assured that God is always going to be with you. He will provide for you. He will protect you. He will ensure that His plan for your life comes to pass. So don't miss your God moments. When you have a God moment, recognize that your life will never be the same again. Yield yourself to God and allow Him to use you for His purpose.